Assalamu alaikum everyone. Today we'll be interviewing Brother Riyad, the principal of GLA, on the topic of Islamophobia.
Welcome, Brother Riyad. My name is Amna Khan.
And my name is Jaren Kula. How are you today?
Good, alhamdulillah. How are you guys doing?
We're good, alhamdulillah.
Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So I was born and raised in Toronto. My family background is from Trinidad in the Caribbean. But I spent most of my life here in Toronto growing up. I went to school in Markham. After graduating high school, I went to the University of Waterloo, where I studied political science. After graduating, I went to Teachers College at the University of Windsor. And alhamdulillah, right afterwards, I got a job teaching at the Islamic Foundation School, and I was there for a really long time. And then after that, myself, Brother Umar, Brother Ali, we started up GLA. And alhamdulillah, we've been running the school ever since.
Oh, mashallah. All right.
That's really nice. So now we're going to ask you some questions about your feelings on Islamophobia.
Yeah, so when did you first experience Islamophobia?
That's a good question. Growing up in Toronto, it wasn't like how it is now, right? It was very different growing up in the 80s. I know that's a long time ago for you guys, but in the 1980s, it was much, much different. And, it wasn't, I don't think anyone labeled it as Islamophobia back then, but there was definitely racism. There was definitely discrimination. Back then, I remember being in a school where I was a visible minority, an actual visible minority, and there were not many people who looked like me amongst even the students and the staff in school. And I played baseball, in the local league or whatever, and there was not a lot of colored people in general. And so I definitely faced discrimination. I got called names, right? I got laughed at, I remember once very distinctly, and this is when I was like maybe 9 or 10 years old, and I remember we were going to one of our baseball games, and someone saw, my parents and I walking towards the diamond, and someone yelled out, "Oh, hey, Packy," right? And which was a really derogatory term back then, right?
So was it like generalized, like the hate?
Yeah, and I think a lot of discrimination and racism is really rooted in misunderstanding and ignorance and not willing to learn about other people. So back then, when you are a minority, you feel it a lot more. So we definitely got targeted in those, in that sense. But I don't, it wasn't necessarily about our religion, because I don't know how many people knew about Islam back then. But it was definitely because, your skin color, you look different, and those type of things, right?
How would you say it has changed over the past 2 years?
Well, as time went on, and, Islam unfortunately got a really bad name, like in the media and, in world politics and stuff like that. And because of those things, I think unfortunately Muslims got a really bad name. And therefore, I think that's where it really gave the rise to Islamophobia, right?
Yeah.
And again, rooted in those misunderstandings, ignorance, and unwillingness to learn. And but I think that in terms of how it's changed, maybe it was just restricted to like name calling back then. But as time went on, especially into the 2000s, it got even worse, right? So people would become violent. People face really bad physical attacks. And then we all know about the unfortunate incidents in many mosques around the globe, even here in Canada with the Quebec City massacre. So we are experiencing something that, I didn't necessarily experience as a kid, as a community, where it has definitely changed.
Yeah, of course.
That's really sad.
Yeah, it is.
So were you in university when 911 took place?
Yes, I was. I remember it very, very clearly. I would say that was very, it was a very impactful, unfortunate event that took place. I was in university. I believe I was in, I want to say, second or third year university.
That is relatively young.
Yeah, right. And I was actually involved with the Muslim Student Association at the time. And therefore, as a community, we felt like we had to come up with a response. We also felt very nervous. I remember it happened in the morning, and so a lot of myself and a lot of my roommates who were Muslim, we were still at home, and then we started hearing on the news, and people started calling us and saying, "Hey, did you hear what happened? Turn on the news. You got to see what's going on." I remember just being in shock, right? And all these things were happening right in front of our eyes. And I remember feeling very nervous heading to campus. Like we almost didn't want to go to campus because we're like, okay, well, are people going to start looking at us differently or treating us or saying things to us? So sorry about that. We actually had a meeting with the MSA and to determine, okay, how do we kind of like respond to all of the stuff that was happening. But it was scary. It was a scary time. People like, especially our Muslim sisters, they were very worried about just being in public, because they're, if, especially those who wore the hijab, they would be, they would stick out, and then people would know immediately, oh, there's a Muslim. And unfortunately, even at the day of, I had friends in New York City at the time, and I remember calling them when I saw all of this happening. I remember calling them, and I remember them telling me that how it was really bad in New York City, for example. Like women were having hijabs pulled off, and stuff thrown at them, and again, people were even taking it out on the wrong religion too. Like it was it wasn't just Muslims being targeted. It was colored people. It was Sikh people. Right in Canada, I remember in Hamilton, I think one of their Sikh temples was lit on fire, right? Because they thought, okay, well, these are the people who are responsible for this attack, right? So things got really, really bad after 9/11. And we were fortunate enough to be we had a strong community on campus, and we had support from the administration. The president of the university met with us, and we had an interfaith prayer on campus to remember their victims, etc. So all of those things. Muslims, all of a sudden, every single Muslim, doesn't matter where you came from, or you were under the microscope. And it was a nerve-wracking time, very scary, but I think though it kind of like caused us to become a bit closer as a community, because before that everyone just kind of like living their own lives, and all of a sudden when you feel attacked, you kind of come together exactly, right.
Did your interaction with your peers change, like the way they treat you?
Not necessarily. I think to some degree it actually changed for the positive.
Oh.
Because mashallah, there's a lot of well-meaning regular old Canadians, non-Muslims who are just nice people, and when they saw that Muslims were being attacked unnecessarily, they kind of reached out and they said that we're here for you, right? So some of it turned actually very positive. Like even here at the Islamic Foundation of Toronto, I don't know if you guys remember, but recently there was like a Jewish community who came and they surrounded the mosque and held hands, and as a symbolic appreciation, I guess, and saying that we're with you, in all of this. So some of it was for the positive, right? So but you're always gonna have people who just are full of hate and do horrible things.
Does Islamophobia affect your life now and stop you from doing certain stuff? Like, for example, some girls, they're scared to wear the hijab in fear of the hate or the discrimination.
Yeah. I would say I think that I'm a relatively confident person in who I am, and confident in my religion, confident. I as I said, I grew up here. I feel like I'm Canadian like anyone else, so I don't feel intimidated. However, that doesn't mean I'm not aware, right? Because I am aware that at any time things can happen, so I'm extra vigilant. But it doesn't change how I interact with people. If I think that someone is kind of being, discriminatory towards me, if I feel it appropriate, I'll have a conversation with that person, right? Actually, the worst, I guess, forms of Islamophobia that I ever faced was when I was actually in teachers' college. So I was at the University of Windsor, and I had a few times where I was called different, like someone called me Taliban and somebody called me Osama bin Laden in the middle of the street. I was just walking to class and people started yelling these things at me, and that is that at that time I felt very nervous. I felt, maybe I should drive to school instead of walking to school, for example, right? So I think at that time I started to change my behaviors a little bit. But as I grew up, got older, alhamdulillah, married and kids, and with the school and everything, I think that I feel confident in who I am. So it doesn't change how I approach anyone nowadays, except to just be aware.
Yeah, of course. That's very nice. The UN has declared March 15 as the International Day to Combat Islamophobia. What effect do you think this will have?
I think it's good for awareness. I think that the more people who know that this is a problem for Muslims and know that Muslims are actually facing some horrible things out there, the better it is, right? So we want more people who understand, right? We want more people who at least can show sympathy towards the things that we face, so that we can kind of educate people as well and move forward. So in terms of having like an international day, I think it helps in terms of just raising that recognition and building bridges. But in my opinion, I think it's on every single Muslim and non-Muslim to build those bridges on their own, right? So like, when you're at home, how much do you talk to your neighbors, for example, right? Or if you go to the store, like how much do you just, interact in a positive way with the people that you meet,
Like forming that connection.
Yeah, exactly, right? Every single person deserves your respect. Every single person deserves your, kindness, right? So we need to be more like that with each other as Muslims and with everyone else as well, right?
So coming back to the 9/11, how would you describe your connection like with your peers before? Like, did oh
Yeah, no, I can tell. Yeah, I can
Yeah,
answer
yeah.
that. Beforehand, I
Yeah.
think that even if people were unaware of what Islam is or what Muslims were, and sometimes growing up, people would kind of joke around, right? Or when it was time to fast, right? Like, oh, you can't even drink water, and trying to like
Yeah.
tease you like that, right? Like, because coming from a place of misunderstanding or just being ignorant or whatever.
Would you like say something back, or would you like choose to like let it be, just let it slide, or would you like describe it to them, like help them understand?
If you mean like now or in the past?
In the past.
So in the past, I used to just let it go, right? Because I didn't want to like cause any arguments, or you just want to like let it go, and you just chalk it up as, oh, they're just joking around, and you let it be, right? I think after 9/11, people became more sensitive, right? And that same comment before 9/11 would have been taken maybe extra, hurtful or whatever afterwards. Because like, oh, you're just saying that because I'm Muslim, or you're just treating me like that because I look like this. You know what I mean? So I think definitely people change, right? And I think even maybe myself was included, that you kind of change your habits or how you approach people. But after 9/11 was a very, it was tense. It was tense.
Wow, Jazakallah, okay.
So, did your interactions change afterwards? How did you feel and react to it, if so?
So building on what I said earlier about that sensitivity, right? So nowadays, I think that if I feel that someone has that, hatred for Muslims, or exhibiting any type of discrimination or racism, if I feel that that person is in a position of power, meaning that they make decisions that may affect people's lives, I'll take it up. I'll call them out on it, right? Because they're possibly going to be doing that to other people as well. If I don't know, go on the bus and some guy just random yells out, whatever, I'll let it slide because that person. And I'll actually give an example. Excuse me, we actually went to Vancouver in our first year at GLA with our grade 12 students, right? That was their grad trip. So we went to Vancouver, and we got onto the bus. Now, we had a large group, obviously, right? All these teenagers, and we're trying to get onto the bus. And it's in Vancouver, and it was a very new city for a lot of our students, including myself. So I remember getting on the bus, but some of our students like used the back entrance to get on the bus, and some of the students used the front entrance, right? Because both doors were open. And the bus driver started yelling at our students, right? And saying, it indicated to me that he was targeting them because they were Muslim, right? I don't recall exactly what he said, but at the time I remember feeling like, you're only saying that, the words they were using, it was clear they were targeting us because we were Muslim.
Yeah.
So I didn't let it go. I went up to the bus driver and said, excuse me, that's not okay, right? We're visitors to your city. We weren't aware that, about the procedure of where to enter the bus from, etc. You could easily just remind us. You didn't have to use that language, right? So, again, because it was the bus driver, right? It was the person running the bus. So if they were interacting with other Muslims, I want them to understand that, that's not okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Of course.
Again, but and on that same trip, we had an incident, and I don't know if this person was like, I don't know, something had maybe mental health issues, or I don't know what it was, but sorry,
No problem.
he started actually yelling at our students.
Oh.
And I just told us to just walk away, right? Because again, random person on the bus, we just get off, take the next bus or whatever.
Yeah.
But when it came to the bus driver, it was a different story.
Yeah. It's different both ways, right?
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Brother Riyad. Thank you
Of
for
course.
joining us today and answering our questions.
No, not a problem. Thank you for having me, and I hope you guys do well with this podcast, and looking to see more, inshallah.
Thank you.
brother.
Jazakallah.
Assalamualaikum.
Waisalam.